and assume the Geshe or that was some daha they can stand or that to
Good afternoon. So this morning, the way of thinking that we spoke about, the way of thinking to cultivate, is firstly recognizing that this precious human rebirth that we've achieved, this life that has such potential, this life that can be used in a way that is truly meaningful, this life is rare because of how difficult it is to achieve, because of the difficulty in accumulating the causes. But moreover, as we specifically looked at this morning, this life is fragile. It is vulnerable. We may have a feeling like we have time, but our death is not only certain, but it's the time of our death is completely unknown. And when our death comes, it's not that we cease to exist. We will immediately take rebirth, and that rebirth can only be in one of two directions, either remaining in the high realms or falling into the low realms. And this isn't a choice that we can decide at the time of our death, I'd like to go here or go there. This is something that our karma dictates. And if our non-virtue predominates and a powerful non-virtuous imprint is the strongest in our continuum and dictates a rebirth in the lower realms, there we will suffer in ways unimaginable. And moreover, our ability to do something about our situation, it ceases due to the intensity of the suffering. Our process of spiritual development ceases. So therefore, one must attain a higher rebirth, continue in these higher rebirths. And to do so, one needs to accumulate virtue. And how to do so? We looked at that again this morning. This accumulation of the practices of ethical restraint, of generosity, of patience, joyous perseverance, and prayer. The three verses we've looked at thus far, the connection between them should be clear. And this will continue as we work through the text, how one verse builds on what has come before it. So initially, it's imperative one relies on a teacher, someone who can guide one through both giving knowledge and advice, the guidance on how to cultivate that knowledge within. Then we looked at this precious human rebirth and what makes it so precious, what makes it so meaningful, but that it is impermanent. And then we came to look at what is imperative is to accumulate the correct causes that will lead to ongoing excellent rebirths. So this is how far we've looked thus far at the various stages that one needs to train one's mind in order to attain liberation and enlightenment. So this is part of the great benefit of coming together for a retreat, is that one gets to engage, or one gets to see the entirety of the path in a condensed manner. One can understand where one needs to go and how one needs to travel to come back to the desired direction. So the benefit of these days together is we'll cover the entirety of the path in a brief manner and get to see how these training, or what the trainings are, and how they build into each other, how they connect with each other. And just to come to answer further the question from this morning, the approach that we need to take, not just now in relation to answering this question, but throughout our training, needs to be a balanced approach. Where that balance lies will differ from time to time, topic to topic, and individual to individual. There is not a fixed set answer to most things. The approach one needs to take needs to be balanced based on your own intelligence. Your own intelligence looks and determines. So to come specifically to the question, in order to transform our minds, this will come about as quickly as we are able to apply ourselves, but also it will come about as quickly as we apply ourselves skillfully. So there's a lot of variation there in terms of frequency and in terms of skill. And for each individual, you need to determine for yourself what is the frequency to apply myself, and am I doing so skillfully? And wherever you settle on, or whatever answer you settle on, that will be your answer for now. And over time, as impermanence shows and circumstances change, what is balanced will shift. And this is something that one continuously works with, in that there will be times, such as right now, where one can apply oneself, and the expression all day and all night is much easier to fulfill in a literal sense. But there'll be other times, such as when you're working and you're fulfilling your responsibilities to your family, when that expression of all day and all night needs to be fulfilled in a different way. So this, what remains balanced will shift, and that's fine. So there is not a black and white, you do like this and you don't do like that. Each individual needs to look at their circumstances and be very aware these circumstances will change. And we need to therefore be flexible with our approach. So the most skillful way to take expressions such as all day and all night, and unceasing, and there'll be others like effort and so forth, is to understand it means do the best that one can. And what is implied even behind doing the best one can is the meaning of being skillful. If one's mind is uptight, pushing oneself, success will be very slow. If one's mind is far too relaxed, success will not come. One needs to be balanced, and that balance shifts depending on many circumstances. So we always need to apply ourselves with some skill. So for some people, depending on their circumstances, all day and all night is something they can do. They have sufficient training by this point that they understand these topics. And they can ensure that whatever they are doing so through the lens of their meditations, their many meditations on ethics, generosity, and so forth. For others, they will ensure there's a little bit of time at the beginning and end of each day, and they'll do this meditation. For others, only once a day. And for others still, it may only be once a week. They look at each individual looks at your circumstances right now and decides, I will do this much. And then one tries to fulfill that, but with using your intelligence, you make adjustments as one goes, recognizing, actually, I want to do more. Or actually, I need to do a little less. This is too much. And that is good. Just be realistic and honest with yourself. And if for those, for example, who say, I can set aside half an hour a week, this really is manageable. You do that with commitment over a year, that's 52 half an hour sessions. That's excellent. At least doing something and doing it in a balanced way, not pushing too hard, not being too overly relaxed, doing it in a balanced way. This way, something will come. It will develop. What's imperative is not to lose the aspiration. And if you know, I'd like to do more, keep that aspiration, keep that wish. When I have the opportunity, I will take it. And now and again, you'll be able to do a bit more. Keep that aspiration alive. But approach the path with a balanced attitude, then success will come. Continuing then in the text, now we come to the 4th verse. Having developed firm certainty in this, please inspire me to be conscientious at all times, abandon even the most minor faults accumulated, and striving to accomplish a complete collection of virtues. The essence of this verse is that do not only commit to striving at the big things. When it comes to accumulating virtue, even when there's an opportunity to do something minor, embrace it, do so. Or if you only have a few minutes, take those few minutes and use them well. Do not neglect minor opportunities to accumulate virtue. Embrace them, use them well. And so too with faults. Do not think that, it doesn't matter if I do this, it's not a big deal, it's not important. We need to turn our habituation away completely from non-virtue. Minor faults do matter and shouldn't be ignored or seen as insignificant. So in brief, the meaning of this verse is we need to strive to accumulate virtue, both minor accomplishments as well as major ones. And so too with faults. Turn away from faults entirely, not just big misdeeds. The first line, having developed firm certainty in this. So this refers to what has been presented thus far. In particular, that this precious rebirth we've attained, which presents such an opportunity, this is finite. It is drawing to an end. This opportunity is drawing to an end. Our death is certain. And when death comes, it's not followed by oblivion, but rather our karma previously accumulated will determine our next rebirth. Therefore, I must accumulate virtue. So this then, having gained certainty in this, then moreover, having gaining certainty that non-virtue leads to falling in the lower realms, we have to abandon all faults of non-virtue, including minor faults. So from the second, third, and fourth lines, the English and the Tibetan, the translation is quite mixed, so just read through the verse. But having gained certainty in this, faults accumulated, including minor ones, these have to be abandoned. The second line in the Tibetan is our third line. So what we need to do is two things: both accumulate virtue, purify non-virtue. So looking at the situation of abandoning even the most minor faults accumulated. So how to do so? Well, there are two methods to apply, one of which we have already looked at. The non-virtue or faults are accumulated either through physical behavior that's non-virtuous, such as killing, or verbal behavior, such as lying or speaking harshly to others, or through mental non-virtue, for example, thinking in a harmful way towards others. So the non-virtue is accumulated through physical acts, speech, or our way of thinking. So we need to abandon that. And the method for abandoning that is ethical restraint, where we restrain our body to act within the confines of what is ethical, thereby restraining ourselves from accumulating further faults. So too with our speech, restraining our speech within the confines of what's ethical, and thereby restraining from accumulating further verbal, non-virtuous karma. And likewise with our mind, restrain our mind from the afflictions, restrain our mind from non-virtue. So this is how we limit or bring an end to the accumulation of further non-virtue. But there is a second method that needs to be applied as well, because up to making this determination to live ethically, we have accumulated a tremendous amount of non-virtue throughout this and previous lives, and those imprints abide on our continuum. These need to be purified. So therefore, in addition to cultivating ethics and therefore bringing an end to the accumulation of new non-virtue, we need to purify the karmic imprints of past misdeeds which abide on our continuum. And the method for doing so is applying the four opponent powers. These four opponent powers all refer to four different minds to cultivate. So they, like with all the trainings, they are mental. So these can be presented in differing orders, but the first we'll look at is that of regret. So one generates a regret through recalling or being mindful of past misdeeds, thinking of things that have been done and generating regret, seeing them as inappropriate because of the harm potentially caused. Then the second is that of restraint, the power of restraint, where for what one regrets, one says that was inappropriate, that was wrong, I'm now not going to do it again. So one makes a determination, I will not do that again. So this is the second power. The first is the power of regret. The second is the power of restraint, or the power of the promise, where one makes a commitment, I will turn away from such non-virtuous behavior. The third power is the power of reliance. So this refers to whom one is addressing one's regret and restraint. One would have already imagined or visualized being in the presence of the three jewels. And when one generates regret, one expresses this regret to the three jewels as if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were with one, as if you were in their physical presence. One generates regret and confesses past misdeeds to them. And then the second, that was the power of regret, the power of restraint, is to them you make the promise, I will refrain from such behavior again. So this is the third power, the power of reliance, which is one addresses can also be called the power of the basis. So the very basis of one's spiritual training, relying on the 3 jewels, one makes the commitment to them. What I've done is wrong, but I'm going to turn away from that. Then the final opponent power is that of the antidote. And this is something one will do specifically so as to counteract or purify one's past misdeeds. And this can be any virtuous activity. It can be a meditation, so meditating on a virtuous topic. It can be reciting mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum. It can be doing something physical, such as making prostrations with a mind of regret. So one can engage then in any antidotal power, something specifically directed to purify past misdeeds. So by relying on these 4 opponent powers, and again, one can call them to mind in any order, the powers of regret, the power of restraint, the power of reliance, and the power of the antidote. By relying on these 4, one can purify past misdeeds. So thus far then, in this verse, we've looked at having developed firm certainty in this, and then for us, the 3rd line, abandoning even the most minor faults accumulated. And so then, moving now to the 3rd line in the Tibetan, our 4th line. In addition to abandoning past faults accumulated, which is done through both the commitment to ethical restraint and thereby not accumulating further misdeeds, and to engaging through the 4 opponent powers, the purification of past misdeeds, one then in addition needs to strive to accomplish a complete collection of virtues. Virtue or wholesome karma, this then can be done in any number of ways. So we, for example, engaging in the meditations that we have covered thus far, meditating on the qualities of the spiritual teacher, reflecting on the preciousness of this human rebirth, meditating on death and impermanence. These are all virtuous meditations, and they lead to the accumulation of virtue or merit. One can make offerings. One can, in fact, do the meditation of the 4 opponent powers just mentioned. This too is an accumulation of virtue. And one can meditate on other topics, love, compassion, wisdom, or the topics that have been covered thus far of ethics, generosity, patience, and enthusiastic perseverance. One can meditate on all of these or any of these. They all serve to be included within collecting virtue or accumulating virtue. Then, moreover, then moving to the final line in the Tibetan. So for us now, the 2nd line, conscientious at all times. So this term conscientious, this is a virtuous mind so it's like our conscience. This maybe is clearer. It's our conscience that guides us in dependence on what we've studied, what we've learned, of what is appropriate and inappropriate. So our conscience will guide us to know that the afflictions are harmful, as well as, and therefore to serve to protect us from coming under the influence of the afflictions, as well as being distracted. And being distracted can even be being distracted to virtuous thoughts, but one's different from where one is trying to direct one's mind. So if one is meditating on ethics, but one's mind is distracted to generosity, both are virtuous, but one is trying to accomplish the one. So conscientiousness is likened to our conscience, which then guides us to what is inappropriate and appropriate. So this mind, this virtuous mind, is accompanied by 2 others. They are not mentioned here at all, but they will be implied. And these, the 2 minds that accompany conscientiousness are vigilance and mindfulness. So these are a group of 3 that we rely on. Vigilance serves as the guard, the guard at the back of our mind, ensuring that our mind stays unafflicted, so the afflictions do not arise. And mindfulness, so mindfulness is the mind, it can be also translated as memory or recollection, that recalls what it is that we are meditating on. So it keeps our mind on the topic and not on the topic. Vigilance notices the distraction from any potential distraction from the topic, and conscientiousness is also in the background as one's conscience to what is inappropriate at this time and what is not inappropriate. Just not like this in the English, but each Tibetan verse ends with what we have in this verse in the second line, please inspire me too. So the verse concludes with this. And so what are we being requesting inspiration for? That we strive to abandon all non-virtue, including the minor non-virtue, not seeing some non-virtues as acceptable, and to accumulate all virtue, not only saying applying ourselves to what we consider greatly virtuous, but all virtue. And to be successful in this, we are also seeking inspiration in the methods to do so, or the assisting consciousnesses of conscientiousness, vigilance, and mindfulness. In the Lamrim presentation, what we have covered thus far in this text is included in the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. So initial capacity is a practitioner who has the capacity, the genuine capacity, to only strive for the initial level of goal, not for the intermediate or the great level. So a practitioner of initial capacity is striving to accumulate the causes that will ensure they do not fall into the lower realms in their very next rebirth, but once again attain an excellent rebirth. And this is the motivation behind their various practices, such as ethical restraint. They are practicing ethical restraint or training their mind in ethics so as to ensure they create the causes to attain an excellent rebirth and not fall into the lower realms. And so too with the other meditations of generosity and so forth. And to become a practitioner of initial capacity, one reflects on this precious human rebirth, this great opportunity that we've achieved, recognize how meaningful it is, so that we don't take it as ordinary or commonplace, but recognize this opportunity that this life presents as something of great value. And then to spur us on and not to continue to be lost in distraction. The subsequent meditation is on the impermanence of this opportunity, so that we embrace whatever it is that remains of this life. And that then spurs us on through the further recognition that when death comes, one can only fall either to the lower realms or remain in the high realms. Therefore, I must strive to accumulate the causes for a rebirth such as I have attained now. So this is the section we've looked at thus far, the trainings which are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. What we've covered here now I think this is our fourth session together, looking at the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. It's been just presented in a very abbreviated manner in the short text. For those who have been coming to the weekend teachings on the Lamrim, there we've had 120 sessions and we haven't got this far yet. So there the text presented in great detail. Yeah, we've covered it just fleetingly in just under 4 sessions. Now we move into the training shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. So this is marked by one's outlook growing in expanse. So the initial training is looking beyond this life to one's next life, not seeing this life as of such great importance, but ensuring our next life goes better or goes well. So one's looking beyond this life. That's the initial training. Now we start to raise our perspective or broaden our perspective, becoming far more far-sighted than merely our next life, and coming to recognize that as long as one is bound in cyclic existence, one will suffer wherever one is born. So thus far, the practitioner is striving to accumulate virtue in order to attain an excellent rebirth. So their perspective is beyond this life, but only to the next. Here we come to recognize that actually I'm in the high realms now and I am suffering. And those around me, also in the high realms, are suffering. Wherever I'm born in the high realms, I'll continue to suffer. I want to gain liberation from cyclic existence in its entirety. So therefore, one's motivation for accumulating virtue becomes far stronger, because one is looking for a greater goal, not only a good rebirth, but actually liberation from cyclic existence. Over the course of your lives, each individual life, you will have engaged in behavior that was fine from a societal point of view, but later you came to recognize actually is harmful, and you stopped it. So sometimes this may be experienced in terms of one's diet, and one recognizes, well, I've really been enjoying this kind of diet, but it's not balanced. I need to moderate what I'm eating. Or perhaps one drinks a bit too much and recognizes this is actually causing me some harm. I need to change this behavior. Or some friendships. Could be good friends, enjoyed many good times, but you come to recognize, actually, I come away from time with these friends and I don't feel so happy inside. We complain a lot, or whatever it may be. These friendships aren't so good for me. And then you make some changes. So this is similar to the process here, whereby in the trainings of the practitioner of initial capacity, one looks at the faults of the lower realms and has a great aversion to that, saying, I do not want to suffer there. I want to remain where I am as a human, or perhaps as a god. Now, we look at the state of a human and a god and come to recognize there is not lasting happiness to be found here either. So the first part of the meditation is to recognize the variety of sufferings that are found in the higher realms. So the practitioner thus far has come to recognize that the three lower realms are places of intense suffering, and has given rise to a determination, I do not want to be born there. But the aspiration remains to be born in the higher realms as a human or god. Now we need to focus on the faults there to see that actually there is no existence as a human or god where one experiences lasting happiness. That actually, whatever one's circumstances are as a human, for example, one still will continue to suffer. One cannot escape suffering as long as one is born within the realms of samsara. As long as one has no freedom from this process of uncontrolled rebirth due to our karma, we will, wherever we are born, whatever our circumstances, we will suffer. So the process here is to come to recognize what one previously had thought was pleasurable, actually is not. So we come now to the fifth verse. Experiences that can never satisfy are the door to all suffering. Such pleasures of samsara are unsuitable to place trust in. Knowing these grave consequences, please inspire me so that a fervent striving for liberation's bliss arises. So this process has the two aspects of looking at the faults of the higher realms, recognizing there is no lasting happiness here, but recognizing that liberation is possible, liberation from cyclic existence, liberation from suffering. So then one looks at the benefits of attaining liberation, as it's translated in our fourth line, the desire for liberation's bliss. So we want to replace the current desire for rebirth as a human or god for a desire to be reborn, to attain liberation from cyclic existence. Looking at the start of the fifth line, or the first half of the fifth line, the fifth verse, the first line, experiences that can never satisfy. So this is a rich area of self-deception, not just self-deception, but communal deception, that the various experiences that we chase after, looking for various pleasures, they always leave us dissatisfied. Or to express it slightly differently, the pleasure we experience never lasts. So all these things we chase after them because we expect some pleasure as the reward of gaining what it is we desire. And whilst sometimes we experience some pleasure, sometimes not even that, it never lasts. And from it not lasting, we immediately desire something new. And in this way, we continue to run after a variety of pleasures, and this is exhausting because it never ends. We are never satisfied. It is never enough. Of all the various things and classes that one runs after, one never reaches that point of saying, I'm satisfied. This is now enough. I'm content. This is unknown to us. If you look at your cupboards at home, the number of shoes and outfits and so forth, is superfluous to one's needs. The number of pairs of shoes and the outfits that one has. And whilst one certainly can justify, I need this for that activity and that for that activity, we hardly need the full array of what we have. And how often have we desired something, we've seen it, it looks wonderful, we can imagine ourselves being seen in it, we buy it, maybe we never even wear it. So this we have a tremendous experience of. We think of another area that is so clear is that of food. We're very drawn to delicious food. We think of the disappointment when a meal doesn't live up to our expectations, whether we've cooked it ourselves or we've gone out and paid. The dissatisfaction of it not fulfilling our hopes. And also, what happens whilst we are enjoying a delicious meal is we are very soon, whilst we are still eating, we are thinking about the next experience. We'll think about when can I have this again? What will I have immediately after for dessert? And in fact, if we're in a restaurant we don't know well, we may call for the menu to choose for next time. Never satisfied. We go on holiday, and perhaps before the plane even lands, we're planning our next trip. It's never enough. It's never enough. And then there are also the less obvious, but sometimes even more powerful ways, more deceptive ways. For example, if we have some power and influence, this can be very addictive. Wanting to grasp and hold on to this power and influence that we have over others, or it can be expressed also as prestige. This can never be satisfied either. So this needs to be looked at, how these experiences can never satisfy. These are, it comes to the next slide. So these experiences can never satisfy. And this exhausts us, running after experience after experience. This needs to be reflected on well, so that one gains a sense of exhaustion, running around chasing this these never-ending experiences that never satisfy us, never leave us content. But then there's a second part of the meditation, which points to the faults of this deception. We see it at the end of the first line. Are the doors to all suffering. So altogether, experiences that can never satisfy are the door to all suffering. So this part of the reflection is to recognize that the end point of all these endeavors that we engage in, the work we do, the hopes that we have, everything that we've achieved, all these experiences that we have that in the end never satisfy us, all that effort we put into that, not only does it not lead to us being satisfied or content, but we end up accumulating a lot of non-virtue. And in this way, they are following these desires is the doorway to all suffering. For example, if one is really desperate for a particular pleasure, one will quite easily push others aside to get it for yourself. Or one will prioritize the fulfillment of one's own needs and not be there for a friend who perhaps needs your company. And even when we do achieve things, we have something new, something beautiful. From this, our afflictions can so easily grow. A sense of pride. Look how successful I am. Look at these possessions that I have. But not only pride, jealousy towards others, competitiveness towards others. So to gain these unsatisfactory experiences We have to encounter many problems and difficulties, but not only that, our afflictions grow. Afflictions such as competitiveness, jealousy, pride, as well as then the expression of our attachment and anger when our attachment is unfulfilled. So these 2 points of how the various experiences that we strive for have never and can never satisfy us, and that they are the door to all suffering, these need to be reflected on well. This really is a rich area for reflection and needs to be reflected on deeply, so that all that we have desired and feel drawn towards and wanting to have, we come to recognize actually that only harms. I must rather leave it aside, and we start to feel more of a repulsion towards what previously had drawn us in. To reach that point takes a lot of reflection from many different angles. So look at your own lived experience and look at what you observe in the world to see how true this is. If you think of any instance of conflict that you've experienced yourself, or friends you know have experienced, or that you see in our world, it comes down to someone wanting something, and wanting it no matter the costs. So this is clearest where there is conflict between nations, where there's warfare, that the political leader decides that they want whatever their neighbor has, and they have the right to that more so than the neighbor. They have power, they have influence, and they can manipulate, and therefore they can start engage in warfare. But it's not just devious political leaders. But if we take those in business, wanting to gain a profit and thereby to self-enrichment, but also in terms of then the prestige of their company growing by great percentages every year, and then them having more power as their company grows, that kind of wish is not dissimilar from wishes that we have. But those who have more power, such as leaders or business, from this, they will readily do things that otherwise they would recognize as wrong. For example, destroying the environment. They will destroy the environment knowingly, but have many reasons to justify it to themselves, their board, their family. Similarly to those who have power. And here it's most obvious with political leaders, but wherever people have power of any sort, if they want to hold on to that, this will lead to further non-virtuous behavior, lying, deceiving, etc., maybe violence. And if you look at instances in the world of corruption, it's all too often the wealthy are involved, either giving bribes or receiving bribes. They're already very rich, but it's not enough. They are not satisfied. They are not content with what they have. And we look from the outside and it seems remarkable. We need to look for those same expressions of that way of thinking within our own life. We need to come to recognize that from these desires, wanting this or that, it leads to a habituation or strengthening of a way of thinking. That way of thinking leads to only problems, suffering, and difficulties for ourselves and for others. This is what needs to be recognized. Not so much the activity itself, but that motivating mind behind it. That motivating mind is what leads to harm. It is this desire and then the acting out on that desire that leads to the harm. Harm for oneself and harm for others. Continuing in the verse, such pleasures of samsara are unsuitable to place one's trust in. So this expression, pleasures of samsara, is very broad, as it should be, because what we are drawn to is very broad. We're drawn to things that we see, that we hear, that we can touch, and so forth, as well as thoughts, pleasurable thoughts. We are drawn in all directions, and we are drawn continuously, wanting this, wanting that. But we need to come to recognize that none of them can satiate us, can satisfy us. And this is because they have no essence, in other words, no real value. And this is because they are not stable, they are not reliable. And this can be understood in the same way that this body is not reliable, that it is in the process of decline and decay. So too with all our valued possessions, for example, or the enjoyable experiences that we have. They are impermanent. They will fade away and disappear. People can be poor, gain a great wealth, and lose that wealth. A family member that becomes very wealthy, their children or their grandchildren may squander it all. One's prized possession may be stolen, may break. And then you think of whatever you buy that you take great pride in. It's something that looks lovely, or you've longed for it for a long time. Where does it end up? Eventually, it goes into the bin like everything else. There's no pleasure in samsara that can satisfy us, because they do not last. When we're enjoying lovely weather because we like the heat, or we prefer the cool and we're skiing, or we like it when it's somewhere in between, like today, whatever it may be, it doesn't last. And if we observe a natural disaster, whether floods or fires, we think of the people living in those affected communities a week or a month before it happened, just going about their life, oblivious as to what was about to befall their community. And this is just the natural way of things. Whatever has come about in dependence on contaminated causes is a something of samsara. And therefore, it is all these pleasures of samsara are not reliable. They are not stable, and they can never satisfy us. So now the third line. This is something that we have to recognize. We have to understand these grave consequences. And the grave consequences is in particular what we see in the second line, placing our trust in these. And placing our trust means thinking that following our desires will lead to a happiness that is worthwhile, when actually all that it really leads to is compounding our self-delusion, our self-deception. Reflecting well on these first three lines, in particular in relation to oneself, recognizing the futility of how we've lived our lives up to this point, of being dazzled by all that is shiny and new and seems to come with a promise of happiness, but never being satisfied, always discontent, unhappy. Thinking well about this leads to a wish to be freed from this. Freed in particular from these minds of desire, yearning for this, yearning for that, and once again being disappointed. So the outcome to come to then is the fourth line. So I'll read the second half of it first. To come to a yearning for liberation's bliss. So bliss, or maybe happiness here, it's the same word, would be better. In that one recognizing that we have never experienced a moment of happiness that is worthwhile, moments of happiness that is lasting or stable, ever, not in this life or any previous life, never once. Every moment of pleasure or happiness we've experienced has faded away and left us yearning for something else, unsatisfied. Then thinking well on this will give rise to a yearning for happiness that is lasting and stable. That is the happiness of liberation. One is liberated or free from samsara. One's mind then is never afflicted and abides in lasting, stable happiness. So here one then gives rise for request, inspiration, so that a fervent striving for liberation's bliss arises. So what is required to be done here in this verse is really challenging, because we are pushing against lifetimes of habituation, lifetimes of striving after this pleasure and that pleasure, things that we can see or smell or taste or touch or just thoughts, things we enjoy thinking about. All of this, recognizing that it's deceiving us. All of it, that this way of thinking deludes us. So to break this habituation requires regular meditation, cultivating this wish for the bliss of liberation again and again. And this is difficult to actually achieve. Therefore, the verse ends with, please inspire me to do so. To just speak briefly about what is meant by liberation. So liberation, which is what this verse leads us to, giving rise to a yearning to achieve, is being liberated from the afflictions. Not temporarily, but permanently, completely. And to do this, the afflictions are what need to be eradicated. But afflictions need to be eradicated to the point that they can never arise. Only then is one liberated. So that means one needs to eradicate the afflictions as well as the seeds of the afflictions, because it's from the seeds that the afflictions arise. So it's not merely reducing or temporarily suppressing the afflictions, but eradicating their seeds so they can never arise. So this is the attainment of liberation. And where do the afflictions arise? In our mind. Where do the seeds of the afflictions abide? On our mind. So it's eradicating the afflictions together with their seeds from our own mind is the yearning that, or the determination that we give rise to in order to attain the bliss of liberation. And to bring this about, one has to meditate deeply on the faults of samsara. That has to be done to give rise to the determination to gain the bliss of liberation. Australia is a country largely of immigrants. So probably the vast majority of us here, either ourselves or our parents or our grandparents, at one point moved here. For them to move here, they would have had a reason. And that reason would have been they had heard about Australia, or in modern times they would have seen Australia on their screens, and they would have seen, it looks like it's a country where I can have a better life than where I am. And then they would have gone through some effort to do whatever it was required at that time to move here. So to emigrate from one country to another, it takes a strong motivation because it's quite an effort, especially if you have a family. And to make such an effort, one needs many good reasons. So this is the similar process to what is being presented in the Dharma. If we want to change our way of thinking, we need a motivation to do so. For a motivation to be lasting, it needs to be based on reasons. The stronger the reasons and the more reasons there are, the stronger the resulting motivation will be, and the more sustained that motivation will be. So any life goal that you set yourself on requires a strong motivation, in particular, if it's one that will take time to accumulate. It's not just the goal to cook supper tonight, but something that one sets for oneself over years. It requires a strong motivation. And that motivation needs to have come about in dependence on many reasons. Otherwise, it will not be strong enough to lead to the goal. So the reflections in the first three lines here lead us to come to recognize the actual reality of the desire realm that we live in, that it is pervaded by problems. There is no lasting happiness to be experienced within the desire realm. There is not a single person or single being anywhere that is experiencing lasting happiness who is born due to contaminated karma and afflictions. Not one, and there never has been. And when we think about the problems in our world and in our lives, it's innumerable. So even today in this country, some people have food insecurity. They're struggling to feed their families. Like we don't have a water problem here, but other countries, they have problems with having access to clean water. Much of the world, there's environmental degradation, and that is causing ever more problems. And then conflict is a problem facing everyone, interpersonal conflict, or between communities, and in some instances between nations. We recognize this. This body too that we value so. Even if we are in the best of health or in the prime of youth, this body is not stable. Disease will come. So recognizing that there really is no one and nowhere that is a place of lasting happiness, but that something is possible if we gain liberation or freedom from this desire realm. Recognizing that that is possible and is achievable for every one of us. Recognizing this clearly leads to a fervent striving for liberation's bliss, wanting to gain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara. To do so requires extensive reasoning. And extensive reasoning means looking from many angles over an extensive period, continuously coming to recognize there's nothing worth striving for. It's all going to let me down in the end. And every time I strive for something that has no real value, it just strengthens my self-deception. I need to let go of this and strive for what has value. So on that point, we can conclude for this afternoon, but there's still a few minutes. So if there are questions, then please feel free to ask. Well, thank you. Oh, then thank you, and we'll see you again tomorrow.